Thank you, Trustee Yachterberg. During the November board meeting, we thoroughly reviewed the process and findings of the working group on Category 2 student success fees, and the board had a robust discussion of these findings. The working group incorporated these comments from the board, along with information gathered from students, faculty, staff, and campus leadership to finalize our set of recommendations. I believe that these recommendations, put into immediate action, will both protect and enable students in our campus communities. These steps ensure that the adoption of campus-based Category 2 student success fees truly reflect the will of the students paying these fees and provide for ongoing transparency and accountability, including the ability of students to rescind their support of campus-based Category 2 student success fees. It is important to note that the moratorium on new student success fees continues to stand through January 1st of 2016, and we will continue to work with legislators to address their interests, beginning with a report to the state on or before February 1st of this year. With that introduction, please allow me to briefly summarize the final recommendations that are in front of you in the board material. First, campuses seeking future Category 2 student success fees must have their process for adopting the fees approved in advance. And as part of this process, campuses should continue rigorous upfront efforts to consult with students and faculty and staff. Additionally, the process for adopting new fees will require a binding 50% plus one vote of the students to implement a new fee. This is true to the spirit of students choosing to support their own education and to the notion and principle of local control. The Chancellor will consult with the Chair of the Board of Trustees before final approval is granted if the fees are used for direct instructional purposes historically covered by tuition or state appropriations. And finally, the approval of both the campus president and the Chancellor is required before any fee is implemented. Secondly, based on the benefit of these fees observed by the campus community, even by those who opposed on principle or due to cost, existing Category 2 student success fees at the 12 campuses are to remain unchanged and in place, unless rescinded by a vote of the students. We also heard from many in the CSU community about the pros and cons of a sunset provision of fees. Balancing these many valid points, the work group recommends that fees may be terminated by a binding student vote after 6 years. Current fees may be voted on starting in 2021. The process for bringing forward and voting on a proposal to rescind a fee will be similar to that of adopting a fee. And if a vote to rescind passes, the President and the Chancellor will provide oversight to avoid any contractual liabilities. In other words, if a part of the fee is supporting something that has a contractual liability that goes out into the future, we will honor that contract for its duration. Next, I would say that campuses should sustain a high level of involvement and transparency in ongoing allocation decisions and program outcomes. This includes student majority campus advisory groups that recommend or make final decisions on fund allocations. The campus community and public will also have access to information to ensure transparent accountability, including a web presence. Additionally, reporting to the Chancellor and the public will occur annually. Both campus and system-wide reporting should be easily accessible and understandable, and campuses shall be held to this standard for all new and existing Category 2 student success fees. Let me conclude my remarks by thanking my fellow work group members and the students, faculty, and staff of the CSU community who took the time to have their voices heard on this important matter. To work group members, my particular thanks to all for bringing your viewpoints to the table. What we have brought forward today, I think, is a thoughtful response to the charge given to the group by Chair Monville last year. Before turning this over to the Chair, I wish to acknowledge Trustee Alexanian. As a trustee and as a student, she brought tremendous insight into our deliberations. As our major concern here is to make sure that the will of the students is heard, I want to ensure that we embrace that same spirit. Talar, could you please share your observations before we open the floor for comments?
Thank you, Chancellor White. And as I had mentioned before, it was truly a great process to be a part of the working group and to really take into consideration all the comments from all our constituencies, not just the students, in terms of what they'd like to see from the student success fee proposal process. And just in terms of the recommendations we've brought forward today, I'd like to add that this past weekend at the CSSA meeting in San Marcos, CSSA actually passed a resolution that supports many of the policy recommendations, including the need to maintain individual campus autonomy in the implementation and the allocation of the fees, to maintain that online transparent process and transparent reports to this board on Category 2 fees, and having that majority student representation on the student fee allocation committees of each of the campuses. And finally, allowing the flexibility of a sunset clause and really empowering the students in terms of allowing them to both initiate such a fee, but if they see that the fee is not serving its purpose, be allowed to then rescind the fee. And so thank you for that opportunity, and that concludes my report.
Chancellor White, Trustee Alexanian. All right, this is an action item on Category 2 student success fees. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, we'll, yes. Trustee Day and then Speaker Atkins.
We could arm wrestle. We had a very lively discussion at our November meeting, so I don't need to take too much time. I would like to compliment the working group and Trustee Alexanian on the proposal. There's almost everything that I raised as a concern in November I think has been included and addressed in here. There might be one or two things that I would tweak, but the art of compromise is at the end of the day, probably everybody's unhappy a little bit, and I'm guessing that maybe that's the case when you've got a very nettlesome issue with very strong and divergent opinions. So recognizing all that, I support the recommendations and appreciate the work of the group.
Thank you very much. Speaker Atkins.
Thank you so much. The comment now would be later when I am able to vote on this item, I will probably abstain without prejudice, mainly because this is going to be a topic of discussion at our assembly budget process and higher education committees. But I do want to add that I think on so many fronts, this really addresses a lot of the legislative concerns that you've heard expressed. Most notably, of course, it sets standards for accountability and transparency. And it's very clear that there was a great deal of student input and involvement in a very meaningful, serious way. So I just wanted to add those comments. And if there's any question I might have or my colleagues might have during the legislative review and process, it's what will be the impact of this on low-income students, and is there a mechanism where to deal with that issue. Other than that, I just really want to commend you for a great process.
Actually, I'm going to ask for a motion and a second, and then the continuation of the discussion will be in order. So do I have a motion? Moved and seconded. All right. Then the discussion is properly on the floor. Yes, Trustee Eisen.
I had a question about one aspect of the recommendations, and also I thought I should probably note that in a couple of paragraphs, the second to last and the third to last, I think something got inserted a little awkwardly, and there's a kind of a typographical error in both that probably should be cleaned up. But my question was about the very last sentence about the funding advisory groups. I'm not sure who can answer this question, but are the campuses obligated, if they have a student success fee, to also have a funding advisory group that is made up of a majority of students?
Chancellor?
Trustee October, Trustee Eisen, yes. And I'm going to ask President Garcia to give us a 30-second summary of how it works at Fullerton.
So we have a committee that is composed mostly of students who are really now looking at how the fee is being implemented and how we're documenting that out to the entire campus. And they have this wonderful campaign saying your student success fee at work, and it's all over the campus. And we're making sure that the students not only see it in emails, but also visually. And that committee reviews from every the promises that were made They review, are those promises being kept? They ask the questions, and the students are really in charge of that committee.
Other questions, please?
If I could follow up with Dr. Garcia?
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind, because I know your student population well. You have a high population of students with high need, and I know you have a great deal of sensitivity and care as it relates to how those students can afford the fee. If you could give some insight to how you address that on your campus, I think it'd be relevant to the speaker's question, and I know it was something that you worked very hard on.
So one of the things that we looked at when this came about is how did that affect our low-income students in the financial aid package and the need? And that's factored in, and I don't know the formula. We talked about this at the last board meeting. Factored that in, that becomes part of the cost of education in the Pell Grant distribution or the SUG distribution. I don't know the formula.
And to that last point that the speaker raised as well, I know President Hirschman at San Diego State has a hardship clause in their student success fee, which allows students who self-declare a hardship to be provided consideration. Correct,
Yeah,
Elliot?
that's also true. And in addition, it's important to note that low-income students who face financial challenges, often benefit the most from having additional faculty and additional advisors as well as co-curricular programs. So that's the other part of the equation we want to be aware of.
Of course. Other comments? Trustee Stepanek, please.
Thank you. Some of the fee, some of the student success fees that are out there right now and potentially in the future are specifically aimed at hiring tenure track positions. This is a question probably for the chancellor. Would the funding of those particular positions end up falling under the ongoing and long-term obligation clause?
Trustee Stepanek, yes. Unless they're in computer science at Northridge, then we'll.
Does that answer your question, Trustee Stepanek?
So if there is let's just play this through so there's no ambiguity. If there is a entry-level assistant professor who is appointed to a campus and is supported by a student success fee, and then sometime in the future that success fee is rescinded by the campus, the portion of that fee that is supporting that individual faculty member will continue as long as that faculty member is employed at that campus. And at the end of that person's contractual obligation to that individual, then it will not, the fee will go back down by that amount of money. Yeah.
Trustee Glazer.
Thank you, Chair Axenberg. I'm supportive of this resolution that's before us. But the one issue that has come up in the discussion has piqued my interest, which is this long-term obligation issue. And I want to be sure that when the student-dominated committees that are reviewing this and are making these choices, they need to be fully aware of that. And I'm not sure I understand, and maybe this is too much in the weeds, what we're going to be doing or the campuses are going to be doing to ensure that they understand, almost as if it's a borrowing obligation with bonds. You know, there's a 30-year payback. I may get into that later. But in personnel, there may be a similar obligation, and we want to make sure they make that as an informed decision. And so what is in place to make sure that that committee is fully aware of those long-term obligations?
Chancellor?
Trustee Achtenberg, Trustee Glazer, the following board action today, the next step is to take this board action, and if it's favorable, to then translate it into executive orders and into binding, I forget, what do we call these things? Coded memorandum. The rules of the road. And in the rules of the road, it is going to be very clear that if a campus is considering a fee, and part of that fee is to create something that has a 10 or 20 or 30-year horizon on it, that's part of the discussion at the time the vote is taken. But we have not yet, because the board has not acted, but we have not yet translated. But we will create the executive orders that give very clear direction to the campuses on these matters.
Please.
Thank you, Chancellor, for that important clarification, and it makes me more comfortable. And I would ask that in your appropriate memorandum to implement it, that you do everything you can to make sure that as these committees change and as the students change, that, and I don't know exactly what that process is, but that maybe in the form of the resolution that they must pass, that it has language which is as clear as can be about that long-term obligation. Thank you very much.
All right, but these are ministerial. Okay. I'm not going to, I'll consult counsel. All right, other comments that you want to make sure the chancellor takes into account as he, if we were to adopt this, as he puts together the implementing memoranda. Trustee Fagan, please.
Just following up on Steve's question and comments, another sort of safety guard in this process is that those kinds of issues that include long-term obligations, particularly those with that are traditionally viewed as tuition-based, that's when the chair of the trustees would be specifically involved in that decision process, and it would be up to the chair then to decide if that's fine, or that it would be a good idea to bring the entire thing to the trustees so the trustees can be involved. There were two concerns about this entire process, and one of those was the idea that decisions about traditional use of tuition, particularly in the classroom and long-term tenure professors and things, that those they sound like tuition. They're backdoor tuition. And that is usually a role reserved for the board. The only difference between Category 2 and Category 1 is that Category 1 fees, what we look at as named tuition, is for the whole system. And Category 2 is the identical thing, but only for an individual campus or campuses. If you had theoretically 22 campuses all agreeing to add these fees, that would still technically be a Category 2 fee because it's not all the campuses. So this was an effort to try and ensure that the trustees can be brought in and be part of those kinds of concerns. And then the other concern about this whole process was that we are under a agreement of sorts not to raise tuition as per the governor's request, and that got into this discussion about what if the students want to do it, who are we to say you can't be taxed? I mean, this came out in the end as this is taxation with representation. And so we determined that is, if the students want it, then the students should have it. And nevertheless, there should be a little bit of oversight as the final sign-off with the administration and if need be, the trustees. So that's how that whole process worked out.
Thanks, Trustee Fagan. Chancellor, did you have additional comments? All right, seeing no additional comments, we're ready to take a vote, I trust. All in favor of Category 2 student success fee recommendation, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, item 1 is adopted.